The courtroom erupted in laughter, a sharp, mocking chorus that cut through the stale air like a scythe through wheat. At the center of it all stood Amos Hargrove, 87 years old, his gnarled hands clutching a tattered journal as if it were his last tether to the world. His weathered face, etched with decades of sun and sorrow, remained steady, even as the young lawyer sneered. What could an old farmer possibly know about justice? Amos had never wanted to be here. For 60 years, he'd tended his small plot of land in Willow Creek, a quiet corner of the Midwest where the sky stretched endless and the earth demanded honesty. His life was simple: rise with the dawn, work the fields, and sleep under the stars. But now, his land's legacy was at stake, threatened by a corporate giant, AgriCorp, that wanted to swallow his farm for a sprawling factory. They'd dragged him to court, claiming his refusal to sell was obstructing progress. The townsfolk, once his neighbors, had turned, lured by promises of jobs and prosperity. Amos stood alone, an old man against a machine. The judge, a stern woman named Clara Vance, peered over her glasses, her patience thinning. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice clipped, "you've been given ample opportunity to present your case. Do you have anything substantial to offer, or are we wasting time?" The crowd snickered again, their eyes glinting with pity or scorn. Amos's hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what he carried. He opened the journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, and began to speak. "My land ain't just dirt," he said, his voice low but clear, like a river carving through stone. "It's my family story. My granddaddy broke his back to claim it. My daddy died defending it. And my boy," his voice cracked, and the room fell silent for the first time. "My boy gave his life for it." The lawyer rolled his eyes, but Amos pressed on, reading from the journal. It wasn't just a record of crops or seasons. It was a chronicle of love, loss, and promises kept. Entries from 1942 described his father hiding runaway soldiers in the barn during the war, risking everything for strangers. Pages from 1968 detailed his son, Daniel, planting saplings before shipping out to Vietnam, whispering, "These'll grow tall for you, Pa." Daniel never came home. The courtroom's mood shifted, the laughter replaced by an uneasy quiet. Amos's words painted a life not of wealth but of sacrifice, of roots deeper than any factory could dig. He spoke of the land's secrets, the spring that never dried, the soil that fed generations, the oak where his wife, Ellie, had carved their initials before cancer took her. "This ain't about money," he said, his eyes locking with the judge's. "It's about what makes us human." As Amos closed the journal, a young woman in the back of the room stood up, her face streaked with tears. Nobody noticed her at first. She was just another spectator, unremarkable in a faded blue dress. But her voice, when it came, was sharp and unwavering. "My name's Sarah Tate," she said. "I'm a historian, and I've been researching Willow Creek for years. That journal, it's not just a story, it's evidence." The crowd murmured, and the lawyer's smirk faltered. Sarah stepped forward, holding a folder of documents. Amos's land is a historical site. His family's actions during the war, documented in that journal, qualify it for protection under state law. AgriCorp's project would destroy a piece of our nation's history. The twist hit like a sudden gust. The judge leaned forward, her skepticism giving way to curiosity. Sarah explained how she'd stumbled across Amos's story while researching Underground Railroad routes. His grandfather hadn't just hidden soldiers. He'd been part of a network that saved dozens of lives. The journal, with its meticulous entries, was a primary source, irrefutable and priceless. Amos hadn't known its full significance. He'd just kept writing, as his father had taught him, to honor the truth. The lawyer stammered, unprepared for this. AgriCorp's case had been built on numbers, profit margins, job projections, but Sarah's revelation reframed the fight. This wasn't just about one stubborn farmer. It was about a legacy that belonged to more than just Amos. The judge called for a recess, her expression unreadable, and Amos sat down, his hands still clutching the journal. Sarah approached him, her eyes bright with respect. "I found you by accident," she whispered, "but I'm glad I did." As the courtroom emptied, Amos felt the weight of the moment. For the first time in months, he wasn't alone. Sarah's words had given his fight a new shape, a new hope. But the battle wasn't over. AgriCorp's lawyers would regroup, and the judge's ruling was still uncertain. Amos looked at the journal, its pages a map of his life, and wondered what else it held, what other truths might yet save his home. The recess stretched into hours, and Amos sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, the journal resting on his lap like a sleeping child. Around him, the courthouse buzzed with whispers, reporters, townsfolk, Agri-Corps' polished suits all dissecting Sarah's revelation. Amos didn't trust the noise. He'd learned long ago that truth could be drowned out by chatter, like rain lost in a storm. Sarah sat beside him, her folder of documents spread across her knees. She was younger than Amos had first thought, maybe 30, with a fierceness in her eyes that reminded him of Ellie. "I've been chasing stories like yours my whole life," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "Your grandfather's journal, it's not just about your land. It's about courage, about people who stood up when it was dangerous to stand." Amos nodded, but his thoughts drifted to Daniel, his boy, who'd stood up too, only to fall in a jungle half a world away. He wondered what Daniel would think of this fight, of his old man clutching a book against a tide of greed. When the courtroom reconvened, the air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Judge Vance called Sarah to the stand, her gavel a quiet command for order. Sarah presented her findings with precision, maps, letters, and faded photographs that corroborated the journal's accounts. Amos's grandfather, Ezekiel Hargrove, had risked imprisonment to shelter runaways, guiding them to safety under the cover of night. The land, Sarah argued, was a living monument to that bravery, protected by laws meant to preserve history. The judge listened, her face a mask, but her eyes lingered on Amos, searching for something. Agri-Corps' lawyer, a man named Preston Cole, countered with polished venom. "This is sentimental nonsense," he declared, pacing before the jury. "A few scribbles in an old man's diary don't outweigh the economic future of this town. Jobs, schools, progress, that's what Willow Creek needs, not a shrine to a farmer's nostalgia." The crowd murmured in agreement, their loyalty swayed by promises of paychecks. Amos felt the room tilt against him again, the laughter from earlier replaced by a colder disdain. Then came another twist, quieter but no less seismic. A man stood up from the gallery, his face half hidden by a worn baseball cap. "I got something to say," he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. The judge frowned but allowed it. He introduced himself as Tom Wheeler, a retired mechanic who'd lived in Willow Creek his whole life. "I knew Amos's boy, Daniel," he said, his hands shaking. "He wasn't just a soldier. He was the one who kept this town together when the mill closed in '65. He organized food drives, fixed folks' tractors for free. That land Amos is fighting for? Daniel poured his heart into it before he left for war." Tom's words landed like stones in still water. The crowd shifted, some looking away, others whispering Daniel's name. Amos's chest tightened. He hadn't known about the food drives, the quiet acts of kindness. Daniel had never boasted, never sought praise. Tom continued, his voice breaking. "I laughed at Amos earlier. Thought he was just a stubborn old fool. But I was wrong. That land ain't just his, it's ours. It's what Daniel died for." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of Tom's confession pressing down on everyone. Even Preston Cole paused, his arguments suddenly hollow. Judge Vance adjourned for the day, her expression still unreadable, but Amos saw something new in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, maybe even respect. As the crowd dispersed, Tom approached Amos, his cap now in his hands. "I should have spoken up sooner," he muttered. "Daniel woulda wanted me to." Amos could only nod, his throat too tight for words. Outside, Sarah walked with Amos to his truck, the journal tucked under his arm. "Tom's testimony changes things," she said. "It's not just history, no, it's personal for this town." Amos looked at the horizon, where the sun dipped low over his fields. He thought of Daniel's saplings, now towering oaks, and wondered if they'd stand long enough to see this fight through. Agri-Corps wasn't done, and the judge's ruling loomed like a gathering storm. But for the first time, Amos felt the ground beneath him shift not away, but towards something stronger. The third day of the trial dawned with a gray sky, the kind that promised rain but held back, teasing the parched earth below. Amos woke before sunrise, his hands tracing the journal's worn cover as if it could speak back. He felt the weight of every word he'd read in court, every memory of his family now laid bare for strangers to judge. In the courtroom, the mood had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by a tense curiosity. Townsfolk who'd once scoffed now leaned forward, their faces caught between guilt and hope. Judge Vance called the session to order, her voice steady but softer, as if she, too, felt the shift. AgriCorps lawyer, Preston Cole, doubled down, presenting sleek charts and projections. A factory that would employ hundreds, boost taxes, and modernize Willow Creek. Mr. Hargrove's sentimentality, he said, cannot stand in the way of progress. Amos listened, his heart heavy but unbroken. When it was his turn, he stood, journal in hand, and spoke not of history but of the present. This land feeds people, he said. Not just my family, but neighbors, too. Last year, I gave half my crop to the food bank. Year before, I let kids from the school plant gardens to learn where food comes from. His voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of decades. You call it progress to pave that over? To make folks work in a factory instead of growing their own food. The crowd stirred, some nodding, others whispering. Then came another unexpected voice. A teenage girl, no older than 16, stood up, her braids swinging as she clutched a notebook. I'm Lily Carter, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Mr. Hargrove let me plant pumpkins on his land last year. I sold them at the market and saved enough for college books. She held up a photo of herself, grinning beside a pile of pumpkins, Amos in the background, smiling faintly. He didn't ask for nothing, said it was what neighbors do. Lily's words cut through the room like a blade of light. The judge's eyes softened, and even Preston Cole shifted uncomfortably. Lily wasn't part of any plan, she was just a kid who'd shown up, inspired by Tom's testimony the day before. Her story wasn't in the journal, but it was part of Amos's legacy, one he hadn't even realized he'd built. The crowd began to murmur, some clapping softly, others wiping tears. For the first time, Amos saw doubt in the eyes of AgriCorps supporters. Sarah took the stand again, bolstered by Lily's courage. She presented new evidence, soil samples from Amos's land, showing rare minerals that made it uniquely fertile, and letters from local farmers who relied on his shared harvests during lean years. This isn't just about history, she said. It's about a community's survival. AgriCorps' factory would pollute the water table, destroy the soil. Progress doesn't mean erasing what works. The judge called for another recess, her face a storm of thought. Outside, Amos found himself surrounded not by jeers, but by faces from his past. Neighbors, old friends, even the grocer who'd bought his corn for years. Lily approached, her notebook clutched tight. I didn't know if I should speak, she admitted. But you've always been kind to me, Mr. Hargrove. Amos managed a smile, his heart aching with pride and pain. He hadn't known how many lives he'd touched, how many roots he'd planted beyond his fields. As the day ended, Sarah pulled Amos aside. We're gaining ground, she said, her eyes alight. But AgriCorps got one more card to play. They're bringing in an expert tomorrow, a scientist, to discredit my soil samples. Amos nodded, his gaze drifting to the journal. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he felt Daniel's presence, steady as the oaks on his land. The fight was no longer just his, it belonged to Lily, to Tom, to Sarah, to everyone who'd spoken up. The courtroom might decide the law, but Amos was starting to believe the truth might win. The final day of the trial felt like the calm before a harvest storm, when the air hums with unspoken power. Amos stood outside the courthouse, the journal tucked inside his coat, its weight both burden and anchor. He looked at the crowd gathering more than before, drawn by whispers of his story, of Sarah's evidence, of Lily's courage. Inside, AgriCorps played their final card. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a soil scientist with a string of degrees and a cold, clinical demeanor. She dismantled Sarah's soil samples with surgical precision, claiming the land's fertility was exaggerated and its minerals common. The factory's impact would be minimal, she said, her voice smooth as glass. This is about data, not stories. The crowd wavered, swayed by her credentials. Preston Cole smirked, sensing victory. Amos felt the tide turning again, but he wasn't done. When called to the stand, he didn't open the journal. Instead, he looked at the crowd, at faces he'd known for decades, and spoke from his heart. I ain't a scientist, he said. I don't got fancy words, but I know this land. I know what it's given me, and what I've given back. It ain't just mine, it's yours, too. It's where we come from, where we'll always belong." His words hung in the air, simple but heavy. Then, in a final twist, Judge Vance did something unexpected. She stepped down from her bench, a rare move, and asked to see the journal. Amos handed it over, his hand steady now. She flipped through its pages, her fingers tracing the faded ink. The courtroom held its breath. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. "This isn't just a diary," she said. "It's a testament to a life of integrity. Mr. Hargrove, your land is more than property, it's a legacy." The judge returned to her bench and delivered her ruling. "Based on the evidence presented, including the historical significance of the Hargrove property and its role in this community, I deny AgriCorps' petition to seize the land. It is protected as a historical site, and its agricultural value will be preserved." The gavel fell, and the room erupted not in laughter, but in cheers. Amos stood frozen, the journal back in his hands. Sarah hugged him, tears in her eyes. Lily ran up, her notebook forgotten, and Tom clapped his shoulder, his face alight with relief. The townsfolk surrounded Amos, some apologizing, others promising to help tend the fields. AgriCorps' lawyers packed up, defeated, their charts and promises meaningless against the weight of truth. Outside, Amos looked at his land in the distance, the oaks standing tall against the horizon. He thought of Daniel, of Ellie, of his grandfather's courage. The journal had saved his home, but it was the voices of Sarah, Tom, Lily, and even the judge that had carried it across the finish line. He realized now that his fight wasn't just for the land, it was for the people who'd stand on it long after he was gone. As the sun set, Amos walked toward his truck, Sarah at his side. "What now?" she asked. He smiled, the first true smile in months. "Now we plant," he said. The journal, still in his hands, felt lighter, as if it knew its work wasn't done. There were more stories to write, more seasons to sow, and a community to rebuild.